On item 3.4, Toronto Employment Survey. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Chair and members of the committee, my name is Eric Allen. This is my partner here in crime, Carol Naklicki. We're from City Planning, Research and Information, and I'm just going to do a brief report back on the results of the 2018 Employment Survey. All right, the Toronto Employment Survey, as many of you probably know, presents an annual picture of change in Toronto's economy. We collect current, accurate, and comprehensive data on employment across the city, including visiting over 75,000 businesses to collect employment data, including business employment counts, employment-related land use information, and to classify employment by economic sector. In 2018, the survey reached 86% of all addressable businesses across the city, and we estimate we visit approximately 99% of all addressable businesses. So in 2018, just to go over the results, employment was up to 1.52 million jobs, up 26,940 jobs. It was a pretty good year again. Excuse me. And this pretty much caps a 10-year period of growth since the recession in 2008, when we've seen over 212,000 jobs added, 3/4 of which has been in the last 5 years. So where these jobs are at in the city, you can see from this map that employment is distributed across the city, but it is concentrated in downtown, the centers, in the designated employment areas, and along major arterial roads. So looking at the year-over-year growth that happened in the city this year, we did see some broad employment growth, reaching 1.5 million jobs, as I said. And employment growth was led by office employment, by a far stretch, adding close to 19,000 jobs, followed up by manufacturing, which added 3,460 jobs, and service. Community and entertainment also grew, while institutional and retail employment steadied, adding little net new growth, that despite growing quite significantly in the last few years. And just looking at the share of jobs across the city, as you can see, almost half of all jobs in the city are office. However, there are shares in other land use categories, so employment is quite broadly distributed across the city. Just looking a little bit more at the 5-year trend tends to give us a bit more information about employment in the city. So the survey has recorded employment growth in all 6 categories over the last 5 years, with notable return to growth stories for both manufacturing and retail. Office employment has increased the most over the last 5 years, followed by institutional and service, which have all added 5-figure job numbers. Both institutional and service employment growth began to slow a bit in 2018, but that doesn't take anything away from their last 5-year trend. Finally, community entertainment, which is our smallest category, is our fastest growing category. So we also look at employment by economic activity to better compare to other jurisdictions and also to measure different flows in trade. We do this by classifying employment according to the North American Industry Classification System. And in Toronto, while we have a very broad and diverse economy, the top 5 sectors make up over half of the city's employment. Looking at the chart on your right, we can see this supports a bit of a trend towards service industries, which are currently making up over 78% of employment in Toronto's economy. This is just a quick chart to show the sort of magnitude of growth in some of the top sectors, led by finance and insurance, which added 12,430 jobs in 2018, quite a significant amount of employment. And we've seen some significant growth in other categories, but this really stands out. In the survey, we also look at part-time and full-time employment trends. And in 2018, employment added 1.4 full-time jobs for every part-time job. And overall, the part-time employment share in the city increased very slightly to 24.6%, up a bit from last year. 24.3%. And another trend that we are also tracking, slightly in conjunction with this, is the average number of employees per establishment, which has gradually increased over the long term, with the exception of more volatile categories such as community entertainment and manufacturing, which reverts a decline in this trend. And this helps us plan for the intensity of services required on different types of employment land uses. We also track the occurrence of new establishments in the city. This is the opening of new establishment locations. And in Toronto generated 3,470 new establishments in 2018, adding to all categories. And Toronto continues to add manufacturing establishments, including 176 new establishments in 2018. Another interesting metric that we found is there's over 1,000 new establishments added in Toronto's employment areas. These are new establishments. We also look at where the establishments are locating, as I said, with the centers showing the largest increase in share of new establishments in the city over the last 5 years. Drilling a bit more into this trend, a key reason for monitoring employment geography is to evaluate the success of our official plan policies. The city has been successful at directing growth strategically according to the city's urban structure, specifically to downtown, the centers, the employment areas, and other strategic growth areas. And these areas have added significant growth since 2013, with over half of all new jobs added in downtown and over 1/5 of all new jobs added in centers and employment areas. Just looking very briefly at the downtown and centers employment areas trends. So citywide employment grew slightly slower in 2018 than the last 5 years at 1.8%. But the downtown and the centers grew above their average rates. And employment areas continue to show steady growth at an annual year-over-year growth of 1.3%, which is perfectly respectable. And just looking briefly at some of these other, the downtown and the centers. Downtown added 21,800 jobs, led by office adding 18,000 odd jobs and 18,800 jobs, and retail lost a few jobs, mostly in food-related retail. And just turning to the center's employment, I won't go into too many specifics about the trends here year over year, but overall the center's employment held steady, showing some varying net changes by category of employment in 2018. Nothing significant in terms of increases or decreases. Finally, employment areas, home to 417,000 jobs in the city. They're significant, contain a significant amount of our employment, almost 28% of all jobs and 29% of all establishments. And they're also home to 92% of our manufacturing jobs. And I'm just going to move back one slide, sorry. We've divided the city up into 5 employment monitoring areas to help us better understand and portray the diverse employment characteristics of the various areas. So looking at these employment monitoring areas, most of Toronto's employment is in the west, northwest, and east employment monitoring areas. And most jobs in these areas are core employment, which include manufacturing, transportation and warehousing, and construction within these employment areas. And in Toronto in 2018, 4 out of 5 of our employment monitoring areas grew, with a slight pullback in the northeast. And we added almost 5,500 jobs in these areas. Finally, I'll just wrap up by saying that the provincial growth plan includes an employment forecast for the City of Toronto. We're targeting 1.72 million jobs by 2041 in the city. And based on our annual reporting, we're able to track some of the employment trends in good detail. And if even in the most conservative projection, if we look at our 10-year trend growing at 1.5%, we're going to reach that forecast 10 years early in 2031, and more likely before that. And the Places to Grow Act does require the province to review this. We expected this to be done in 2018, so hopefully it will be done this year to get us more in line with what we're seeing on the ground. That's a report back for the 2018 employment survey. Thank you very much. I'll take any questions. We please do.
Questions of staff? Councillor Wong-Tam.
Thank you very much. I don't have a page number, but under this particular page, it says Centers of Employment. Can you just explain the net loss of jobs at Yonge and Eglinton? Because that area is under tremendous growth. Has those lands been converted to other uses? Is that what we're seeing there?
It's a good question. We haven't seen any significant pullouts by major employers or closures, but we have seen some incremental losses in retail and as well in office.
So there's no specific one issue or one incident that you can point to on why they've lost 500 positions there?
No, nothing in particular, but we have seen some construction-related pullouts, some retail-related office. We've seen a few declines in a few of the retail companies, but their head office.
Through the chair, could I possibly add to that? We see a lot of development activity in Yonge and Eglinton. So we're going to see cycles where we see sites that were for office coming forward for residential, and they'll also be coming forward for employment. But when they go through the cycle of being torn down, we see that temporary loss of positions in that area.
Okay, thank you very much. That's extremely helpful. I think there was one. Sorry, just they're not numbers, so I won't try to rifle through it. But there was one particular note that sort of jumped out at me, and that was regarding retail. So as much of the economy, I mean, especially retail-based economy, that moves over to the web-based presence and online shopping. Everywhere downtown I go, I see lobbies filled with boxes and parcels, all coming from Amazon or where have you. So people noted are no longer shopping the same way they did even 5 years ago. Is that what is driving down the retail numbers?
Thank you. Through the chair, we did notice some food-related retail being the leading like Shoppers Drug Mart, Loblaws, et cetera, those types of businesses in Metro. Showing some larger, well, not larger, but sort of relatively more significant declines in downtown, particularly. And it's hard to track why, but we have also seen some additions at different locations for some of these. So it might be some more populated related employment shifts and consolidations, but it might also just be related a bit to automation in addition to shopping. As you know, I mean, I shop and go through the automated checkout sometimes. But definitely, I think we're beginning to see some trends related to online shopping that may be pointing to some employment.
Through the chair, I would add that there's been an evolution in retail over the past 30 years, which is showing up more significantly in terms of the changing retail formats towards medium box stores, resulting in a substitution of bigger locations with fewer staff, more automation. That's caused, while total retail activity has increased, retail employment has flatlined.
And so with respect to those who are generally employed in retail, oftentimes they are younger people, sometimes they're part-time hours. I know that there is now a trend to hire those who are a little bit older. I've seen baristas who aren't in your 20s anymore. So is there concern that that type of entry-level jobs, that at some point in time we're going to lose that employment space for the population that steps into employment, the workforce for the first time? And are we prepared for that?
Through the chair, well, on this survey, we don't track the demographics of workers. However, we would track that through a place of work and related census information on a 5-year basis.
And would you be able to track that the next time around? Because you're heading back out to collect this information again. It'd be really helpful to know who's got access to jobs that are well-paying, who's employed precariously. Is that possible? Because we design all sorts of programs at the city to try to meet policy objectives. So it'd be very helpful to know who's getting the benefits.
Through the chair, I don't think it's something that we capture through this survey. I think working with SSH&A, for example, working on workforce strategy at the city is something that we would feed into with this information and other data sets from other sources to develop policy approaches that speak to some of those
Thank you.
matters that you're raising.
Just because I know that even in Councillor Fletcher's earlier questions around who is a test client and where are they being employed and the local benefits, how is that being recorded and then measured, and then how is that being reported?
Yeah, I don't have anyone here from TESS, but again, I think just like with transportation strategies and other strategies that we develop across the disciplines here, this is a critical input into understanding where we need to put public policy priorities and emphasis.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other questions? Councillor Fletcher?
We recently added, when did we add office into the employment areas?
Through the chair, we have provided for office since the first official plan in 2002.
Didn't we change something to add them into employment zones or districts or part of our core zones?
No, what we did when we did the revised employment policies in 2013 is we went from one employment area to two to do a further refinement of what was permitted in each of the employment areas. So we went from a general employment to a core and a general employment.
So core employment,
Permits offices.
and that is as of what year?
2002. We have, what core employment did not exist until we did the official plan 231 in 2013. But before that, when the city, the amalgamated city, adopted its new official plan, we did permit offices within employment areas.
I'm talking not an office adjunct to manufacturing, but office towers.
Offices permitted, office towers are permitted. The zoning bylaw does not reflect the official plan's permissions necessarily across the city with respect to that.
Okay, so what happened within the last 3 years where we're now putting office in rather aggressively into core employment areas? Something happened.
I'm not sure I could say that we're putting it in aggressively.
Well, people are interested in putting it in now.
Well, and so I can't speak to why. I think I would say one of the things that the city has done over the last number of years has provided and demonstrated its protection of employment lands. And when I'm speaking to employers, they have spoken to the fact that they have confidence in locating within those areas based on the city's practices and policies.
I think I'd just supplement that.
Thank you.
The gray collar, kind of not blue, not white collar, gray collar.
Cute,
The changing nature of work, that you have an office building and it could be, and the activity could be manufacturing, they could be tech jobs, it could be film production, they could be any number of types of jobs. And I think we're doing some further work this year on understanding from a more descriptive perspective exactly what is going on in some of these sectors so we can better inform our survey work going forward. And maybe Michael can just add to that.
Okay, but maybe I can just go, we've got no page numbers. Can I just ask that we get page numbers? It's so hard when we can't do that. It's the one that has the boxes, that rest of the city, downtown, employment, and then centers. So the downtown, any idea how, I'm just looking at relative sizes. The downtown has the biggest box. I don't know if it's the biggest geographic area where we're talking about the employment. Any idea how many acres you're looking at in the downtown zone? Or how? Is that it in the box?
Through the chair, I don't recall the geographic area of the downtown, but no, it's not the largest area. It does have the largest concentration of employment.
So that's actually what I'd like to see, is here's what we're calling downtown, here's the geographic area, here's the number of jobs. So it's a heavy lifter for jobs. right?
Correct.
Downtown. Big, big, big. And then we have employment areas. There's only 16, and I think 16% of all land form. I think that was somewhere I saw that earlier. And it's providing a lot of jobs, 20%.
Through the chair, I recall it's 12.7% for the designated employment areas, and yes, it's a tremendous contributor to the city's employment.
And the land form, you know, the amount of space it takes up for the number of jobs that are
A lot of those
there.
employers are land intensive, so you would have a large distribution warehouse, for example, with a lower employment and so on and so forth.
I know, I'm just looking at the amount of land, so we can look at that. And then the centers, is that what you're calling Yonge Street out in Etobicoke? And is it covering up the Scarborough Town Center?
Yes, those are the four growth centers, Etobicoke Center, North York Center, Scarborough Center, and Yonge and Eglinton.
I just didn't hear the last answer.
And Yonge and Eglinton.
Yonge and Egg
North York Center, Scarborough Center, and Etobicoke Center.
and Etobicoke Center. So those are the centers, and there's some office there, or jobs, and then the rest are, okay. Thanks.
Any further questions? Seeing none. Speakers? Seeing none, can I get a motion to receive? I think this is adopt the recommendation. Councillor Wong Tam, all those in favor? And that carries. Thank you. Item 3.5, Housing Plan 2020-2030 Consultations Update. We have a speaker, Lanrick Bennett. Yeah, it's great. All set? Okay, and gonna have to start your clock. Go ahead.
So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lanrick Bennett. I'm here with Housing Now TO. I'm here to speak on improving stakeholders' outreach for the modern city. We're just trying to get my PowerPoint up, but a little bit about myself. I'm a volunteer at Eastminster Church on the Danforth in Ward 14. Also sat on the Black Community Police Consultation Committees for about 2 years. I've been working previously with the Premier's office with the region of Toronto, and just finally finished an assignment with the Ministry of Government and Consumer Services working on accessibility for both public and private dwellings. I'm volunteering my time right now with Housing Now TO, and we're just hoping to get a display up, but nothing. Yeah, and we were all set. No, I did. Not going to do? Okay.
We have the presentation, so why don't you just
Just walk
tell us which
through it?
slide you're
Sure.
referring
Yeah,
to?
no,
That's probably the easiest. Oh, there you go.
Hey, there would be. Okay. Sorry, everyone. Okay, so let's get back in here. Just a little bit about the Housing Now TO project. We've been basically going through open data using Toronto Council's piece. We've been going through TTC, Toronto Parking Authority, and Crosstown Eglinton. We've been literally just opening up the ability of looking at the open data that we have on the city. The mayor has put forth a want for more housing, and we truly believe that more housing is necessary, especially affordable housing. And we wanted to make sure that all the open data that we could possibly put forth to showcase for Torontonians was put into this project. Since we've launched the site, we've had almost 7,000 visits, and it's growing every day, which is fantastic. So how can we help to improve stakeholder outreach in the City of Toronto? To us, we need to stamp out NIMBYism. Land use institutions amplify the voice of unrepresented groups of community and residents who in turn diminish the supply of housing in places that need it. We're looking for voices. The voices that are in Toronto right now are not necessarily from the city. People are coming from all over the world, and we want to make sure that their voices are being amplified. Home ownership also is changing from people owning their houses to renters. We're following alongside how Montreal is right now, where we have more renters than home owners. When we get into participants for land use meetings, they're looking a lot like this, and we want a better mix of who is speaking to land use in our city. Staff already knows this. They've already created a Toronto Planning Review panel that looks like our city. We want our stakeholder consultations to look like the city that it is, and we're really pushing on that. Finally, stakeholder communication needs to be well funded, and we wanted to show an example of a TO Waste app where you've got a lot of local media push. You're pushing forth hard on social media, and you're also communicating through street and TTC advertising. That needs to be kind of the crux of what you're doing with your Housing Now consultation. So just quickly in closing, we'd love for you to focus on future residents of the city. Focus on young people, immigrants, low income, new Torontonians, renters especially. We're hoping that we can reduce the influence of current homeowners. As much as they have been a historical bedrock of the city, we know that the city is transforming and changing, and we want to make sure that renters and others have a piece to that puzzle. We're also looking to, hoping that you'll increase funding for social media, that you'll be pushing forth on opening it up to as many people as possible, having even live streams of the meetings so that more people can participate. And in all honesty, when you're in doubt, just do more. The city needs to have a better voice, and we're hoping that we can help in that regard.
Thank you. Any questions of the deputant? Councillor Fletcher, go right ahead.
One sec, Mike. Yeah, I said I would ask everybody. I'm going to ask you, because I wasn't here. Are you very supportive of us removing the 250-meter and the 80-meter requirements? Yes?
Yeah.
And this looks like you set this website up, Housing Now. This isn't the city's website.
It's not the city's website, yeah. So Mark Richardson and myself put together basically combing through the open data that we have right now, but making it a bit more streamlined and a bit easier to understand what it is that the city is putting forth for Housing Now.
And you have a Twitter handle as well.
Yes.
So you're not worried that your work and the city's work gets confused here?
In all honesty, the city is actually using our website.
Oh, are they?
Yeah.
How are they doing that?
So they're visiting it. We have more visits actually from the city than from anywhere else.
Oh,
Yeah,
oh, okay, thank you.
no problem.
Great. Any other questions? Councillor Wong-Tam?
Yes, thank you very much. I'm interested in exploring ideas on how we can bring out new voices to these consultations. I really appreciate your list of recommendations that we want to expand
Yeah.
those voices. Oftentimes the City of Toronto does do consultation, but we do it obviously mostly and exclusively in English. But we do know that there are a multitude of people who are not coming out to those meetings. What are some concrete examples that we can do to change how we do the engagement?
So I had brought up live streaming these events, and I think even Paula Fletcher can attest to this, that where we had a pretty low turnout for a lot of the first few meetings for East Harbor, and we were trying to get more of the constituents energized in wanting to visit or come to these meetings, and live streaming them really did kind of open that up to almost that aha moment of, okay, this isn't such a bad thing. It's not boring. It's something that may be of interest to me, and that has kind of pushed forth for, at least in my region of the city, where we have streaming going on, that many more people are really getting involved. I'm sure that we could lean on the city to provide translations as such. I've seen at least sign language at many of the meetings that I've gone to, and I'm sure that we can expand on that, and for sure would be a positive piece.
And with respect to the recommendations, where actually there's no recommendations in this report, but the city is going to be releasing some details around what the comprehensive consultation plan will look like. And I know that, I guess there's a timeline for that for staff, but without a deeper dive into how to engage with the different ethno-cultural communities, with communities that are perhaps newer to Canada, communities that their language is not predominant in English, if we don't do that work ahead of time, is there some concern that perhaps the comprehensive public consultation plan may come out already not as robust as
That's right.
as,
No,
as we
very
want
fair.
it to be?
Yeah, very fair assessment.
Okay, thank you very much.
No problem.
Thank you. Councillor Bradford?
Thanks very much for the deputation. So just quick question. I understand that their staff want to support community organizations that are doing work in this space through the consultation process. You've identified live streaming, translations. Are there any other sort of supports that you think would be beneficial?
Really, the city has already done a really good job in certain sections, and that's why I had brought up the waste TO piece. The city's already doing a lot of good things, but it needs to be across the board. I don't think you can just cherry pick, projects that need funding. This has to go across the board. This is a massive piece of the city puzzle, and I don't think we should be shortchanging this specific project at all.
So like a consistency in our application of that support.
Yeah.
And then I thought it was interesting about the amount of people that are visiting the website and where that's coming from. Do you see that geographically across the city? Is it east, west, downtown, north, south? Is it?
It's across the board, and I mean, like I said, the majority is coming from this building per se, but across the board, we are seeing people jumping on board and taking a look at what it is that we're presenting. We've tried to make it as simple as possible. It's a Google map, and we've basically just mapped out the 11 sites that the mayor brought forth almost, what are we, like 5 months ago, and we've plotted them out. We've put as much information as possible on each of those 11 sites, and we're building it out as best as we can. The information is out there. It's just the fact that no one has put it all together in one simple package.
Thanks very much.
No problem.
Thank you. Any further questions? Seeing none, thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Questions of staff? Councillor Perks?
So at the February meeting of this committee, Staff was asked to bring us the consultation plan, and we have the essentially two-page document now in front of us. But what I can't find a number of things. So what questions are you going to be asking the public during your consultation?
Through the chair, there's a range of questions. We've drafted a questionnaire, and we'll also be reviewing that with the external advisory committee that is being formed at this moment.
Oh, so you don't have the questions available for us here today? Because you want to run it by
If
the
you're,
advisory committee?
Councillor, as you're aware, we have a draft questionnaire that's being prepared, and I'm pleased to share that with the members of the committee if they want to get into that level of detail.
Okay. The External Advisory Committee. Now, the City of Toronto has a number of ways that we bring in external advisory committees. If they're providing advice to council or councillors, there's actually a report tomorrow at executive listing the 1, 2, 3, 4, well, there are a number of them. This isn't one of those, is it? It's not on the executive committee recommended city council advisory bodies.
Through the chair, this is an advisory committee that will provide advice to staff, and is being co-chaired by Councillor Bailão.
Okay, who's on that committee?
So the committee consists of about 25 individuals who have volunteered. They were recommended through a staff process and also through a number of organizations that are working with groups with lived experience.
And that's great, and I'm glad that you had a process. Who's on?
And they're volunteered.
Who are they?
I'm prepared to give the list to the committee if they wish the list of
Sure. Can you
members
put it
of
up?
the advisory committee.
Can you put it up, please?
Sure, I'm happy to do that. Just, can you give me a moment to do that? Can you put it up on the,
Can I? It was only like a minute.
I'll give it to you. I'll give you 5 minutes. I'll start it again.
I'm informed that technical staff will need about a minute and a half to put it on the UVS stick. So if there are other questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Sure. The report makes mention of a kit that councillors will be given for the consultations. Does that, or the do-it-yourself workshop materials, maybe those are two different things. Does that include things like models that other municipalities in Canada or Europe or the United States are using to deliver affordable housing as sort of talking points? Does it include tools we currently use? Like, what's in that kit?
So that kit is being prepared as well. And the rollout of this will be taking place over the next couple of weeks, and it will include models of where things are being done in other jurisdictions, including the drill down in June. That will be the forum. We'll also have a review of other jurisdictions and what they're doing that will work and be helpful to Toronto.
Okay, so I'm looking at the portion that talks about the forum, and it says the focus of the forum will be to integrate the results of the consultations.
It'll be that, it will be that, a report as to what we've heard to date, but it will also look at those other jurisdictions.
Okay, I understand that. I'm just trying to figure out, so here we are, it's the third week of March or something like that. And by June, you intend to have results to this forum. So results of what? Like if we don't, like I imagine, and I'm sorry I'm belaboring this, but I imagined I would come here today, you know, based on the motion Councillor Wong Tam moved at the last committee meeting. I'd come here today, I'd be able to see the consultation materials and the consultation process, and I don't. And I want to make sure we get this right, because this is a decade-long program, and I want to make sure we're taking out information of the public about the range of things that are possible and asking them to give us an informed opinion about how to go forward. And given that there's like 10 weeks between now and that forum, I'd imagine I could see that stuff.
Councillor, this is a tremendous exercise, and you'll see from the amount of people involved, even in the advisory committee, and staff are moving as quickly as we can on this project. As you can imagine, it's not the only thing we're doing. So, Valessa will walk you through the list.
So here's the list. I will go a bit slow so you can see. There's the United Way, Toronto Real Estate Board, Greenwind, Ryerson City Building Institute, CP Planning, Toronto Region Board of Trade, Ontario Council of Associations Serving Immigrants, Toronto Alliance to End Homelessness, Advantage Ontario, Women Act, YMCA, Toronto Senior Strategy Accountability Table, University of Toronto, TCHC TF Advisory Group, Dixon Hall, First National, Native Men's Residence, Margaret's, Building Industry and Land Development Institute, Lived Experience Advisory Group, which we are in the process of compiling. There will be a representative from the Dream Team, and Deputy Mayor Byla will be the co-chair, as Sean has mentioned.
Any other questions of staff? Councillor Wong Tam?
Yes, thank you. And Sean, I do appreciate the fact that this is not the only thing on your desk. I was hoping that we were going to see a more detailed outline of the consultation plan, perhaps with the actual plan, but here you, in the report, you reference the fact that you'll be releasing that plan sometime in March. So perhaps you can give us a sense of when is that plan going to be released formally? You must know that by now, because we're 21 days in 20 days in March.
We're screeching to the end, March the 29th. It'll be released on March the 29th.
Okay, and
if I could also say, just with respect to outreach to organizations outside of who normally comes to City Hall, we do have a granting program where other organizations, particular organizations in their own languages or within their own communities, will be provided assistance to host their own consultations and report those results to the city, and that will be via an application process.
I appreciate that. I was heading into it. Let me just, you know what, I'll ask this question since you've just raised it. How do we justify splitting off a process that community organizations and ethnocultural groups that don't speak English as their predominant first language, how do we justify that they have to go off and do their own consultation and feed back into a main process, as opposed to us meeting, as a corporation in the City of Toronto, meeting people where they are?
Councillor, I think actually it will be both processes. What we wanted to do was have the opportunity where organizations didn't feel comfortable working with city staff directly, or for instance, victims of violence, where they could essentially work within their own communities and not have to essentially do it within a city-defined process. So it wasn't that we were suggesting that that was the only process available to them, but it was an additional process that allowed existing organizations that might have processes already underway, and with vulnerable communities that frankly would use their own approaches to how they wanted to tell us what they wanted to say, as opposed to us imposing that.
Don't you think there is some benefit in actually learning how to do consultation with communities that perhaps may be more vulnerable? On the National Housing Strategy, there's specific equity groups that the strategy targets. One is Indigenous, one is women fleeing violence, one is veterans, one is LGBTQ2S. Wouldn't it make sense for us to work with those community organizations and those stakeholder groups so that we can actually make sure that the process has enough integrity in it, that we're able to ask the questions directly to those communities, and to make sure that they feel like they're being fed into a bigger program, as opposed to asking organizations to apply for a grant, design their own consultation process, and then feed that information back into the main model, and then trying to make sense of what the outcome should be.
Councillor, through the chair, we used this similar process when we designed the program for the first 10-year plan. It was extremely successful and well received, and it wasn't seen as an imposition on those organizations. It was actually something they asked us to do. And if reference particularly to sistering, I recall a conversation in 2007, and they said, give us some resources to empower us so that we can go back out and we can then come back and tell you what's going on. And so this isn't something that staff have dreamed up. This is actually something that was a resource that the community asked us to give them, in addition to what we'd otherwise be doing with them in any event. And if you look at the advisory committee, you also see representation from the Indigenous community, the Black community, and other communities, so that we're going to be ensuring, as a part of the consultation process, that these communities are fully engaged as much as we can.
I appreciate that, and that's very good information for me to have as a background. It just, the approach feels rather paternalistic, the way I'm reading it. Perhaps I'm wrong, so thank you for shedding that information. Among your list of advisor, there's no one from the LGBT. There's no one that specializes in LGBT-style housing or advocates for LGBT housing. I don't see anybody that specifically is a specialist in gender-based violence and that form of housing. So I appreciate there may be individuals who, with skin color, from particular groups, and they may have sexual orientation from particular groups, but there is a specific body of knowledge that I think it's very important that there are housing providers, or perhaps those who advocate for housing, not for settlement services and not for job training, but specifically around housing provision and supports for different populations that I believe probably we would benefit if they were on those on that advisory committee.
Through the
And
chair.
then it also lines up, I believe, with what the
your last
National
question,
Housing Strategy is also asking us to do.
Yeah, through the chair, we're more than happy to have a look at the list, and if there are additions the committee members want to include or have us consider, more than happy. There's no limit set on the size of the advisory committee. And again, we believe that we're designing with Laurel Consulting, who is the firm that was hired to assist us in this process, a very inclusive process, and one that, quite the contrary from being paternalistic, would be one that would be comprehensive and welcoming to everybody.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? I just want to follow up and clarify a question that Councillor Wong Tam mentioned, because I was under the impression that there was also going to be specific stakeholder consultations. So not only are we working with some of the organizations, but for example, with the Indigenous community and LGBTQ communities, there's specific stakeholders roundtables that staff is going to lead and help and consult with. Is that correct?
That's correct, Councillor.
Okay, thank you. Okay, speakers? Councillor Wong Tam?
Thank you very much. I must admit, I'm a little bit disappointed in the report. What I was hoping to receive by way of my motion from the previous meeting was to have the draft consultation plan before us, so therefore we can take a deeper dive at this stage and perhaps hear from the community that we're hoping to engage with, just early thoughts of whether or not we're on the right track, and whether or not the process that we will hopefully have designed is going to be as inclusive and as broad-reaching as possible. But now it seems to me that a consultation plan is going to be launched on March 29th. I appreciate that staff have been working really hard on it. I don't want to take anything away from those efforts, but unfortunately we won't have a chance to see it, and the public won't have a chance to comment on it before we kick this off, which will then lead us through a 10-year the building of a 10-year strategy, where we know our last 10-year strategy didn't get us the outcomes that we were hoping for. And there's probably some reasons why. But that's why I had moved that particular motion, hoping we can just take another look, pull out that one particular piece, knowing how important this next body of policy work is for the city. So I'm going to just say thank you to staff for doing all this work in the building. It would be really helpful if the staff had brought back a report that we could actually provide some helpful comments to. And I don't mean to, I don't want to take anything away from your good work, but it is very frustrating to not be able to comment on a consultation plan when specifically we asked to see the consultation plan. Thank you.
Thank you. I just, I do want to thank staff. They have an incredible amount of work ahead of them. I think that there's a website, from what I understand, that is already actually up and running, and that staff could put the plan up. I don't think there's anything that stops any member of the community to work with staff and to give feedback on how the consultation is developing from now until the report comes to council. I think the consultation is actually going to try to involve every single councillor in the city, and hopefully councillors in this committee will take a leadership role in getting consultations in their own communities and involving the city as a whole. And so I think we want to involve everybody, and I don't think that this is the end. This is just the beginning, and I ask that the members of the committee work with staff and follow this process along and give them feedback. As you know, the staff is very welcoming on feedback and suggestions, and I think that we can do that definitely here, but we can also having with a good relationship that we have with them and assisting them in doing this work. So said that, Councillor Perks, you want to speak? Yeah, go ahead.
So I recall actually the launch of the previous 10-year housing action plan. And, I've watched it evolve, and I've watched what the outcomes have been and where the shortfalls have been and so on and so forth. And over the last, I want to say, 3 or 4 years, as the housing crisis has become more and more severe, several members of council, myself, Councillor Bailao, Councillor Fletcher, Councillor Wong Tam, and many others have said maybe we need to move this piece forward or do something around that piece. And we've been told, that's great advice. Why don't we put it into our 2020 plan? I've been probably told that a half dozen times, and I see Councillor Wong Tam nodding. That's something we've all been told. Everyone in the building has known for years that this crucial and important work was coming. We also know, after having just been through a budgeting process where we were told there are 2 kinds of plans. There are the ones that are budgeted for and the ones that are in principle. We've heard those words a lot. And a thing I can tell you from having sat on the budget committee many years ago is that in about 3 months or even 2 months, the budget submissions for the 2020 budget start. I'm sure that financial planning has already been in touch with some of the general managers saying, okay, we're starting to get ready now. So we've known this thing is coming for 3 years. We've known that we would have to consult with the public. We knew that the first year of implementation was going to require budgetary submissions to happen over this summer. All of that is known. And yet here we are 10 weeks ahead of the beginning of the summer, and I'm still finding out and haven't found out how it is we're engaging the public in one of what I would say is one of maybe three of the most crucial public policy issues facing the City of Toronto. Now, I appreciate that we demand an enormous amount from the public service in dealing with these issues. Our shelter housing and support staff, I'm amazed any of them ever gets to sleep at night. They work so hard. Similarly, our affordable housing staff, I probably have single-handedly consumed about 4 souls because of all the demands. Maybe 8, because of all the demands I put on them. But if given those demands, we don't have the demands, we don't have the resources that we would have been in the middle by now of a really robust consultation plan that I could show to people in Toronto saying, we're looking at things like the Vienna model. We're aware of what just happened in Berlin, where they're considering a referendum to expropriate any landowner who owns more than 2,000 units and turn that into public housing, where we're not looking at what's going on in Vancouver. We should have all of that in the hands of thousands of Torontonians today. That should all be in everyone's hands so that we could have the conversation further advanced. And if the problem is that City of Toronto staff do not have the resources so that we could be at that place, I'm wondering, where was the budget ask this year and last year? I very carefully reviewed the asks from Shelter Housing and Support, the asks from the Affordable Housing Office. I saw some requests to help deliver something the mayor announced, Housing Opportunities Toronto, but I didn't see the ask to make this process accelerated and robust. You know, and I'm sitting here with my copy of the City of Toronto Act, which says very clearly City Council governs, and we lead these processes, not with respect the chair of the committee or the mayor. And the fact that I, as someone who is part of that government, don't know how this is being rolled out and haven't been alerted that we don't have enough resources to do a more robust consultation disappoints me profoundly. And that's not a disappointment with the individuals involved, it's a disappointment with the government as a whole.
Speakers? Councillor
I'm just
Fletcher?
going to suggest that we proceed, but then we revisit this next time to look a little more closely at some of the features that we might just want to give some advice on, because I'll just say that many of us have been in the front lines on a lot of housing issues, and there may be something there either individually or collectively that we can assist with.
Okay. May I suggest that people follow it pretty closely, and I commit if people feel that this needs to come back because there's some amendments that needs to be done, we'll put it back on the agenda.
Okay,
Okay.
why don't we have that?
Yeah.
It's not going to council, is it?
No, it's an information.
It's information, so, you know, it's easy to
It's an
kind of put it
information
back
report,
and figure out what more might have to happen. But this is a very big issue. It's probably it is the biggest issue in the city, so I think for people who want to get their teeth into it a bit more, that shouldn't be surprising. I think staff want to move this fast as possible forward, and I don't blame them. And all of us do. At the same time, because it's going to be a seminal consultation and it's a seminal issue, we do want to make sure that it's just, that it's got all the breadth and depth necessary. That's all.
Thank you. And can I have a motion to receive for information?
Motion to adopt the item.
Councillor. It says committee received this report for information. Okay. Report to adopt the item. All those in favor? That carries. Opposed? And that motion carries. And the last item on our agenda, it's 3.6, expanding supportive housing in Toronto. Update, and we do have speakers. And Jean Stevenson.
Good morning, good afternoon, councillors. I'm still Jean Stevenson. My name is still Jean Stevenson. I'm still the Executive Director of Madison Community Services. I'm still the Vice Chair of the Toronto Alliance to End Homelessness. And I'm also germane to this particular agenda item is also on the TAEH's New Development Working Group. Frankly, on behalf of the TAEH, I'm here to say some thank yous because we're extremely pleased, starting with commending the Deputy City Manager together with the Affordable Housing Office and SSHA for this proactive first report. It's just the very, very beginning, but have been invited to, as providers, to start to provide input, and as I say, it is a start, the goal of expanding supportive housing in Toronto. Also, on behalf of TAH, I want to take this as an opportunity to thank City Council as a whole for directing the Deputy City Manager to report on options for I'm quoting, an aggressive, supportive and transitional housing build plan in Toronto. That's very exciting to those of us within this sector and much appreciated and of course much needed. The specific motions that were passed about targeting one of the Housing Now sites to be supportive housing, and especially to have enhanced consideration be given to submissions that include new supportive housing for all 11 of the Housing Now sites. Also, the motion that recognizes the need to find ways to address the need for deeper levels of affordability. That's just going to be very crucial moving forward, particularly with the city's commitment to creating 1,800 supportive housing units a year over the next 10 years. So regarding this agenda item, I can attest that it does represent and accurately capture the identification by the providers of numerous challenges that need to be addressed, and also some concrete suggestions that were made at the meeting. I know I'm going to run out of time soon, but germane to your comments, Councillor Perks, in terms of what's happening in other places, you see in the report there is reference to looking at modular housing to address homelessness, and that was done in Vancouver, and it provides a very good model. So in preparation for the charrette, the Toronto Alliance to End Homelessness New Development Working Group carried out an initiative where interviews were conducted with 8 supportive housing providers, with recent attempts, a few successful, a lot not, to create more affordable housing. And in my the document that I have presented for my deputation, I have copied the summary of the executive summary of the results of the of this interviewing of providers who have tried to create new developments, and also the committee itself, or the working group itself. So all of that is in my deputation, and it shows that there is an alignment in what was captured a bit in this this report, and we appreciate that. And we're offering much more detailed action steps. And I would say that 2 key things is that if you are able to take a look at it, is recognizing that the city's now embraced an all-government approach to creating affordable housing through its new Housing and Planning Committee and Housing Now initiative to enable the city to meet its annual target of 1,800 new supportive housing units. We really need the city to take a similar approach, to recognize the creation of perpetually affordable housing accessible to people on OW and ODSP who need support as a city priority in all city divisions, meaning that everybody is on the same page, everybody singing from the same prayer book, and really working together extremely collaboratively to make to achieve the target of 1,800 new supportive housing units.
Great.
I know I've gone way beyond.
Thank you.
Thank you very
You
much.
didn't
questions
go
of-
over your time. You
open to
had no clock. We let you go as long as you wanted. You should be very happy. Thank you.
Thank you,
Can
Paul.
I, any questions of the deputy? And Councillor Wong Tam?
Thank you very much, Jean, and I thank you very much, Jean, for your deputation. I appreciate that you're still Jean this afternoon. I
Yes,
think we were
thank
this morning. Are you talking about the three-page report that's before us?
I'm sorry?
Are you talking about the three-page report?
Yes. Yes, I was a participant at that meeting, and as I say, we were very pleased to be invited and to have the opportunity to be part of the start of addressing the commitment to expanding supportive housing in Toronto. But we look forward to that being an ongoing opportunity, and are playing a role and are being a reference group in that process.
'Cause I believe the motion back in January was specifically to report back on an aggressive supportive and transitional housing build plan in Toronto, but that's not what's before us today.
Right.
Right, so it's more like an interim. We had a meeting, we spoke to stakeholders, a few big ideas came out of it, or perhaps not necessarily new, but big to Toronto, modular housing, and the need to unpack perhaps some of the provincial and federal budgets, the announcements that are to come.
Yeah, that is correct. There isn't the aggressive plan yet.
Right, okay.
And we're very much wanting to see that get rolling and to be part of that process.
So your enthusiasm is the fact that there's a process, and you're feeding into the process, not necessarily with the contents of this report.
No, right, correct. Except that it's correct and it's capturing some of the
Great.
the suggestions. But I particularly appreciate the opportunity to share, and this is an initial sharing. We're hoping that there's going to be a charrette soon, where all city divisions are brought together with the Toronto Alliance to End Homelessness and Affordable Housing Office organizing it. Councillor Bilal is involved in that. And we will be presenting the full set of recommendations that emerged from our interviews and our own discussions around things that need to happen for an aggressive approach.
Right. And Jean, you mentioned that that you're seeing an all-government approach to this. Is this all-government approach a result of focused and coordinated meetings that happen on a regular basis with a timeline to achieve certain outcomes, perhaps with a plan that's going to be costed and funded? Is that, I haven't heard about this all-government approach, so I'm very
I think we're just referencing what had been stated when the mayor announced the Housing Now initiative and the 11 city sites, that it was going to be an all-government approach to make it happen, or certainly have, even get to the point of identifying the 11 sites.
Except for the Housing Now report is not an all-government approach. It's simply the City of Toronto unlocking land. There is no provincial or federal participation right now.
Okay, so you're talking about other levels of government.
Yeah, you were talking about this order of government.
We were talking, in this particular case, we were quoting from vis-a-vis the municipal government and the creating affordable housing. I always put quote marks because we know affordable housing is really not affordable according to its current definition. But
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Councillor Fletcher?
I do, now that Councillor Wong Tam's brought that up, and that one of the things that I've been concerned about and have asked deputants about before is the other levels of government. And we know that you have very good access to us. Would you agree?
Yes, thank
you. You can make deputations
Yes.
about things that are so important to you. And you are here for the Toronto Alliance to End Homelessness, as well as your core position at Madison Community Services. Does it concern you? One of the things the city has asked, we only have a certain budget for all of the work that we're doing, including building supportive or supporting people, moving them from places and being able to support them. or even to be able to support them, let's say in Toronto Community Housing, where they're vulnerable but they have no supports. Would you join us, or is it, let me just ask if the Toronto Alliance to End Homelessness is advocating strongly for the federal government to pay the bill of the $45 million that we've asked for to cover the refugee housing, immediate urgent shelter needs. And I'm always asking if we can ask you to be stronger in your advocacy. Once we have that $45 million covered, then those dollars can cover other parts of the housing and homelessness portfolio that you are very interested in. Can you just address that? Are you concerned that that money wasn't in the budget?
Oh, absolutely. And it was not in the budget that was just announced?
No, it was not in the budget, even though City Council asked directly for that $45 million. It was not in the budget.
I think that's just horrific. It's just terrible. Anything that the Toronto Alliance to End Homelessness can do to, support the city in that process, I know that.
What kinds of
we're open
things
to
could you do?
We
your
could be
mind?
speaking to our MPs. We could be, many of us have contacts, at other government levels, and it would be something that I'd be pleased to bring back. In fact, tomorrow's an executive committee meeting of TAH.
Is it?
Yeah.
Because obviously you didn't know that. Well, we all heard that right away, because that was our
only
big
thing we were
ask.
listening
That was all we were listening for, and got that information. So that kind of surprises you, doesn't it?
Extremely so.
Do you think the federal MPs should be advocating more strongly for that money for the city? Because it simply takes money out of the pocket of other projects that you are very much in favor of.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what would be helpful is maybe perhaps a small meeting for the Toronto Alliance to End Homelessness to find out what the city actually has done to date. For example, was the city contacting, or is the city not? Or is it not appropriate for the city to be contacting MPs?
No, the
MPs
city can't, we've asked directly city to federal government for those dollars, but having advocates that would like to see that $45 million would be very helpful. And would be great if you could tell all the people in the community, and then I'd be happy if you'd let me know that that's happened, because I'm very concerned with dollars are stretched. And I know that people feel very comfortable coming here to raise issues around homelessness and shelters, but getting information back that we're swimming, we're going underwater here, and we need that money.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much.
And so Kara Heinrich, who's our executive director, would be following up on this, if, and who should she contact?
I guess she could, the chair, or just a letter to the committee would be, that would be very helpful if the committee knew that others than just the city manager and the mayor were speaking about the money. The community your community is very passionate and has a very loud voice. And this is a moment when that voice needs to be directed to Ottawa. Thank you.
Thank you for informing me, and I can't speak until we've all agreed, right? But personally, I can say that I just am appalled that this has not been honored. This was in fact a commitment. Madison itself, we work with the refugee claimants ourselves, so we're right in there, and. And thank you to the city for sheltering them.
Thank you, Jean. Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you. Any other speakers on this item? Seeing none, questions of staff? Councillor Wong-Tam.
Thank you very much. With respect to the wait list for supportive housing, what is that official number in the City of Toronto?
Through the chair, so The provincial wait list is around 15,000.
And our wait list in the city? I mean, obviously, that's province-wide. I've heard 16,000 just for the city of Toronto.
Through the chair, so we don't have a wait list specifically for the City of Toronto. The need, if you look at the Wellesley Institute report, talked about Toronto requiring 18,000 supportive housing units of the 56,000 that they estimated for Ontario.
Thank you. So there is, I believe there is a wait list, not necessarily operated by the City of Toronto, but a third-party provider. Okay, so it's somewhere between 16 to 18,000. Would that be correct?
Yeah, so Access Point wait list is the provincial wait list of approximately 15,000.
Okay. That's okay.
So
So
the City of Toronto doesn't operate that wait list. That's what we're.
recognizing that, my question was, how many people are on the wait list for supportive housing for the City of Toronto?
Yeah, so through the city, our best estimate is around 15,000.
Okay, thank you very much. So recognizing that as a baseline, let's start there. So knowing that you probably didn't have enough time to put together a report, that's clearly the case, and we should not be asking you for something that you can't deliver so quickly. But understanding that that's at least a baseline that we start with. In the meeting that you would have held back on February 2019, you would have started the conversation, I imagine, with some baselines, understanding environmentally where we are today, what we need to do to get to where we need to go tomorrow. So what would that strategy look like, the sketch? Just give me an idea of how are you folks going to arrive at the 15,000 units, and then factoring in that that need will probably grow.
Through the chair, Councillor, the considerable amount of time in the meeting, and then we're happy to, again, from a staff perspective, share the minutes of that meeting with you, or the notes that were prepared, was essentially looking at what the current climate was and the challenges that the current organizations have, particularly with respect to maintaining what they have. And I think it's a really important point that there was a lot of sort of emphasis about, well, how do you grow the system? Well, the system itself is struggling even as it exists today. These are a lot of social housing providers that are providing supportive housing, but on funding programs from the last century.
Right.
Okay, and so part of the challenge in front of us, and what we'll be bringing forward as part of the strategy when it comes, and the further report, whether that's in May, June, or July, we'll talk about how we preserve and maintain and strengthen our existing network of supportive housing providers that are actually feeling very, very vulnerable within the economic climate and within the funding programs that they exist. The second part then is how then do you grow that system, and where would it grow? And so it's sort of, if you will, the aspirational part of it. And the organizations are itching, if I could say that, to come forward with us and look at that. And in particular, how they attach, if you will, their efforts to other programs that are already in flight. So, for instance, the Housing Now initiative on the 11 sites was one. But in addition to that, Create TO has many, many other sites that are not larger sites that will probably be more appropriate for nonprofit organizations in terms of scale and opportunity. And so we're going to be exploring those as well.
I appreciate that, and thank you very much for that helpful information, because it's not quite in the report. So it's really about maintaining and then growing, and knowing that supportive housing across the city is funded by a number of organizations. The city, of course, is one of them. The LINS is the other, the Ministry of Long-Term Care, the Ministry of Community and Social Services, Developmental Services Ontario. The only one that I listed that is relevant to us is really the City of Toronto. That's direct, that we have direct control over. Everyone else, all those other agencies and arms of government, are specifically provincially funded. And perhaps there are more that are federally funded. The province has got to be at the table in order for us to build the 18,000 new units of supportive housing, in order for us to meet that growing demand. what is the strategy to engage the provincial government?
Through the chair, as part of our intergovernmental asks, as a part of both the federal and provincial budgets, the city manager and the mayor have requested support from the provincial and federal governments for supportive housing. That's why the April 11th provincial budget is so important coming forward next month. And as well, the city's senior executives have also been in discussions with the provincial agencies and the Ministry of Health with respect for the need for supportive housing.
And what can we do to make sure that those, between now and April the 11th, the federal budget just came out, so we have to unpack the granular details of that. But between now and April the 11th, what can we do to make sure that the provincial government knows that this is a dire need, a service request, a funding request from the City of Toronto?
Through the chair, I think highlight those elements of the
How?
the provincial government's program where they had said that they would provide supports for persons with mental health needs in particular. Those were provincial.
Sorry, I just want to get, I'm trying to get to an action because I think that we don't have a lot of time left.
That's your last question.
Yeah, we don't have a lot of time left. There have been times where the city has undertaken a campaign to raise the profile of a particular issue. I recognize that there's conversations at the staff level. There are conversations between the mayor and perhaps the premier's office, I don't know. But what can the residents do? What can we do? If there's no pathway out of shelters into the supportive housing, into transitional housing, they're stuck. And we have thousands of people right now who are stuck. What can we do to send that message to Queen's Park more urgently?
Well, I think it would be a message that MPPs particularly should hear. And if there's a way by which in particular now, of course, when you've got councillors that are elected in the same boundaries as the MPPs, that the MPPs be informed how important of an issue this is to the city, or the premier for that matter.
Great, thank you.
Staff is doing everything at our end that we can.
I know you are.
Thank you. Councillor Fletcher,
what
you
we
had
can do.
questions?
Go ahead, did you have, I think Deputy City Manager has something to add to that last one.
No, I was just going to add that there was an announcement last year by the province to invest, I think it was 1.9 billion in addiction and mental health supports, if I remember correctly. There's been no detail coming out. But I think one of the things we can do as staff is, because we've been asking, I think we can put together a better campaign and maybe try and link it to things that we know are a high priority for the province, such as reducing hallway medicine. So I think if we can make a case that supportive housing can be linked to reducing the number of people going to emergency centers, we might. But why don't we'll bring that back. Well, let us think about, because we do have the ask, we have council's motions behind that. It's just a matter of how we package that to have better influence at the provincial level.
Thank you. Councillor Fletcher.
I just have one question, and that's a number of supportive housing projects were built with a program that has a 25-year horizon. I'm thinking of the Good Shepherd project that I brought up today again with when the first speakers were here. This wouldn't be, are we looking at a situation where in 10 years that landlord can take the building back and it's no longer a supportive housing building?
Through the chair, Councillor, most, if not all, of the supportive housing projects have been built through different operating agreements, and they all have end dates. And you're correct that those end dates will arrive, and unless there's a newly negotiated arrangement on a go-forward basis, then those projects would no longer be supportive housing.
So do we have any idea, maybe we do, and forgive me if you've done that already, all of the projects that are within that, I believe is a 25-year window, when they come due, and what that would look like? Has that been reported out at all?
Through the chair, that has not been reported out, but we are, with our colleagues in shelter housing and support, tracking when operating agreements end, not only with programs through the investment in affordable housing or the affordable housing program, but also through the social housing approach. And that was my reference, if you will, to Councillor Wong Tam as to, yes, let's expand the system, but we also have to make sure that we're not losing supportive housing in the process as well.
So you must have a spreadsheet somewhere that shows that exact thing, which ones are coming due and how many units, where the pressures are. Would you have that existing? Somebody has that?
Through the chair, I'm wondering whether that's a part of the report that we could include when we come back in May, so that you had the full picture, both forward-looking, but also what's at risk.
So I would ask for that. I don't think I need to make a motion for that, Madam Chair, but I think that would be very helpful, your suggestion in adding that in, so we really look at the whole spectrum. And
Through the chair, Councillor, I have to apologize to some extent that some of the reports before you today perhaps are not as detailed as they otherwise would be.
yes, understood.
And I am taking instruction from the committee as to the level of detail that you want to see in the future.
Well, I think that since we're talking about expanding, that we need to know what the contracting looks like as well.
I think in future, Councillor, through the chair, we'll include appendices that will give you more detailed
That's helpful.
information.
Yes, that'd be great. And so you will be able to do that in May? We'll kind of see what the forecast is and the horizon looks like for the ending of certain operating agreements.
We're taking that as an instruction.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Speakers? I am gonna, are you speaking, Councillor Wong Tam? No? Okay.
Only to say thank you to the staff. I recognize that we are asking for a lot of quick, robust reports, detail, plans of action that require a significant brain power and also capacity to write. And I know that this is all coming pretty fast and furious. The Affordable Housing Office has not been empowered over the past terms, as far as I can tell, since I've been here, to really take, a strong, visible lead on the issue of housing. I know that that's changed. The profile of the office is going to go up, and at the same time, we need to empower staff. Clearly, we need to empower staff to have more resources to do the work. So I just want to say thank you, and if my comments or my questions came across too harsh today, I apologize. Thank you.
Councillor Perks?
I wanted to quickly add something based on what the Deputy City Manager was, just to be helpful. So this business about the relationship between housing, supports, and so on, and emergency rooms and hallway medicine. Just so that you're aware, we dealt with this, the Toronto Drug Strategy, about 8 years ago, and we involved emergency services, the Toronto Police Service, breakaway addiction services, but it was led by Toronto Public Health. And we actually did some good social research about who's winding up in emergency rooms because of a lack of supports. So that work's been done, and the thing that might make it more attractive to the province is it did include a lot of support from first responders, police, and EMS. Okay.
Thank you. Very helpful. I do have a motion. This is a motion as a result of a conversation that Councillor Cressy had with staff, and I'm moving on his behalf. I think that there's going to be, the report says July, and staff is going to do their best efforts to see if we can try it to the May 28th. We were hoping to have a meeting in June and have it at the June, but there's no meeting in June, so there's no planning and housing meeting in June. It's May 28th and July 3rd. So we change it to May 28th, but understanding that there's some challenges here. And with that, can we move this as a package? Yep. All those in favor? And that carries. And we're done for today. Meeting adjourned. Thank you, everybody.